The command center of the mothership was dying. Sparks flew from broken consoles. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. Queen stood in the middle of the chaos, her crystalline skin reflecting the red emergency lights that flashed across the walls. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, with skin that looked like polished diamond. Her people had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. Now, in just 6 months, everything was ending. "Shields at 12%, one of her officers called out. His voice was steady, but could see the fear in his eyes. "The swarm will break through in less than 2 days. Looked at the massive display screen that showed her below. 300 billion lived on that planet. Her people. Her responsibility. Around the planet, the last of her fleet fought desperately against an enemy that seemed endless. The swarm ships moved in perfect formation, like a machine that never stopped, never tired, never made mistakes. The swarm had appeared from the edge of the galaxy 8 months ago. Nobody knew where they came from or what they wanted. They didn't talk. They didn't negotiate. They just consumed everything in their path. World after world fell to them. The Empire, which had conquered hundreds of star systems, couldn't stop them. Every battle was a loss. Every strategy failed. Admiral stepped forward. He was one of her oldest commanders, a warrior who had won countless battles. Now he looked defeated. "My queen, we must consider surrender. Perhaps if we offer them our technology, our resources, they will spare some of our people." "The swarm doesn't take prisoners," said quietly. "You know this. They consume everything, every ship, every building, every living being. There is no surrender." "Then we die with honor," said, straightening his back. "We make our last stand here. We show them that the do not run." Wanted to agree. Everything in her culture told her that running was shameful. Warriors stood and fought. Queens led from the front. But as she looked at the faces of her officers, young and old, she wondered if honor meant anything when everyone was dead. A younger officer approached. His name was her intelligence commander. He carried a data tablet and looked nervous. "My queen, I have a suggestion. It may sound strange, but we have run out of normal options." "Speak," commanded. "There is a species in the outer regions. Humans. They are very new to space travel, very primitive by our standards, but I have been studying their history and their behavior. They are different from us." Laughed bitterly. "Humans. Those tiny creatures with their slow ships and basic weapons. What could they possibly do against the swarm?" Pulled up information on his tablet. "They have something we don't. When faced with impossible situations, they don't calculate the odds. They don't accept defeat. They try anyway. Their entire history is full of moments where they should have failed, but they kept fighting and found a way to survive." "That sounds like foolishness, not strength," another officer said. "Maybe," admitted, "but we have tried wisdom and strength and strategy. Everything has failed. Perhaps foolishness is what we need now." Studied the data about humans. They had only left their home system 30 years ago. Their weapons were centuries behind technology. Their largest ship was smaller than an escort vessel. By every logical measure, they were irrelevant to this war. But remembered something her mother had told her long ago. When drowning, even a blade of grass becomes a rope to grasp. "Send the distress call," ordered. "Direct it to the nearest human colony. Tell them we need help." "My queen," protested, "this is beneath us. We do not beg lesser species for help." Turned to face him, her eyes hard. "We are the who are about to become extinct. I will beg anyone if it gives my people a chance to live." The message was sent. It traveled through space at faster-than-light speed toward a human colony world called New. Didn't expect a response. The humans probably wouldn't even understand the message, or they would be too smart to get involved in a war they couldn't win. 6 hours later, the communication console beeped. Everyone in the command center froze. "We have a response," the communications officer said, his voice full of disbelief. "It's from a human ship." "Put it through," ordered. A face appeared on the screen. It was a human male, much shorter than with dark hair and a friendly smile that seemed completely out of place in a war zone. He wore what looked like work clothes, stained with grease and oil. "This is Captain Ho of the freighter Lucky Dragon," the human said in surprisingly good language. "We received your distress call. We're coming to help." "You understand what you're flying into?" asked. "This is not a small conflict. The swarm has destroyed 300 worlds. They have ships that could crush your entire fleet." Ho nodded. "Yeah, we got the message. Sounds bad, that's why we're coming." Stepped forward. "Human, this is suicide. What can your one ship possibly accomplish?" "Oh, I'm not bringing one ship," Ho said cheerfully. "I called some friends. We'll have 7 ships. Give us 3 days to get there. Can you hold out that long?" The command center was silent. 7 ships. 7 tiny, primitive human ships against the unstoppable swarm. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was pointless. "We don't have 3 days, said. "We barely have one." "Then hold for 1 day," Ho replied. "We'll work with whatever time you give us. Just don't give up yet, okay? Help is coming." The transmission ended. Stared at the blank screen for a long moment. "He's insane," said. 7 ships cannot change this war." "No," agreed. "They cannot, but he came anyway. He heard someone calling for help and he came." She turned to her officers. "We will hold for 3 days. If these humans are foolish enough to fly into certain death to help strangers, then we are brave enough to buy them the time they asked for." "And if they fail?" an officer asked. "Then we fail together," said. "But at least we will fail knowing that somewhere in the universe there are people who answer when others call for help. That alone is worth fighting for." The fleet regrouped around the shields were reinforced. Weapons were charged. Every warrior prepared for what might be their last battle. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because 7 humans were coming who believed helping was more important than surviving. 3 days later, sensors detected 7 human ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were small. They were old. They looked like they might fall apart at any moment. Queen watched them approach and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hoping. The human ships were nothing like expected. The Lucky Dragon, Captain Ho's vessel, looked more like a flying warehouse than a warship. 2 of the other ships were clearly built for mining, with huge drills attached to their front sections. There were some salvage tugs that normally pulled broken ships to repair stations. Only 3 vessels looked like actual military ships, and even those were old models that they would have thrown away decades ago. When Ho requested permission to board the mothership, Admiral wanted to refuse. "This is a waste of time," he told. "We should be preparing our defenses, not hosting a meeting with amateurs." "Let them come," ordered. "They traveled 3 days to get here. The least we can do is listen." The docking bay was full of officers when the human shuttle arrived. They all stood at attention, curious to see the aliens who had answered their distress call. The shuttle door opened and 4 humans stepped out. Ho was first. He was average height for a human, which made him look tiny next to the 8-foot-tall warriors. He still wore his stained work clothes and carried what looked like a personal data pad. He smiled and waved at the assembled as if he was arriving at a party instead of a desperate last stand. Behind him came a woman with short hair and tool belts around her waist. She looked around the docking bay with the eye of someone checking machinery. A tall, muscular man followed, moving with the careful posture of a trained soldier. Last came a girl who couldn't have been more than 17 years old, completely focused on her data pad and barely looking where she was walking. "Greetings," Ho said in. "I'm Captain Ho. This is my chief engineer. He used to be military. And the kid is best navigator in human space, though don't tell her that because her ego is already too big." "I can hear you," said, not looking up from her data pad. Looked at them with barely hidden disgust. "This is your command staff. A cargo captain, a mechanic, a former soldier, and a child." She's 19, Ho corrected. Totally legal adult. Still can hear you, muttered. Stepped forward. Captain Ho, I am grateful that you came, but you must understand the reality of our situation. The swarm fleet is massive. Their ships are technologically superior to ours. They have destroyed everything we sent against them. Your 7 ships, however brave, cannot change this. You're right, Ho agreed to everyone's surprise. We can't beat them in a straight fight. We'd last about 5 minutes, so we're not going to fight them straight. He gestured to, who finally looked up from her data pad and pulled up a holographic display. It showed the current battle situation around the swarm ships formed a perfect sphere around the planet, slowly tightening like a closing fist. We've been studying the swarm's behavior during our trip here, explained. They're incredibly efficient. Every movement is calculated for maximum effect. They don't waste energy. They don't take risks. They're basically a giant computer playing the perfect strategy. We know this already, said impatiently. That's why we're losing. Right, said, but computers can be tricked. They work on patterns and data. If you feed them the wrong data, they make the wrong decisions. Pulled up another display. The swarm thinks in terms of threat assessment. They calculate which targets are most dangerous and allocate resources accordingly. Right now, they've calculated that the fleet is a minimal threat and they can destroy you slowly with minimum effort. Again, we know this, said. How does this help us? Ho smiled. We're going to make them think we're a huge threat. We're going to make them believe that humans have some kind of super weapon that could destroy their entire fleet. The silence in the meeting room was absolute, then started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. You're going to pretend to have a weapon you don't have. The swarm will scan your ships. They'll see you have nothing. This is the plan I've ever heard. That's kind of the point, Ho said. The swarm expects logical behavior. They expect us to use our best weapons first. But what if we use our worst weapons and make them think they're our weakest weapons? Was beginning to understand. You want to make them overestimate you. Exactly, said, pulling up simulation data. Look, the swarm calculates based on what they observe. If a ship makes impossible maneuvers, they assume advanced technology. If a weapon causes unexpected damage, they assume it's more powerful than it looks. They don't understand bluffing because they never bluff themselves. Stepped forward. Here's the plan. Our ships go in looking reckless and stupid. We dodge when we should run. We attack when we should hide. Every time we survive something that should kill us, the swarm has to recalculate their threat assessment. We'll modify our engine signatures to look weird, added. We'll release false energy readings. We'll make every shot count in ways that look like we're holding back our real power. The swarm will think we're testing them, studying them, playing with them. And while they're distracted trying to figure out what our secret weapon is, Ho finished, they'll pull forces away from your planet to deal with us. That gives your shields time to recharge and your people time to repair your ships. Shook his head. This is insane. You're asking your people to fly into the middle of the swarm fleet as bait. They'll be torn apart. Probably some of them, yeah, Ho admitted. His cheerful tone was gone now. That's why we only brought volunteers. Everyone on those 7 ships knows this is basically a suicide mission. But if it buys you even a few more days, if it gives your people a chance, then it's worth it. Why? Asked quietly. Why would you do this for us? We're strangers, this isn't your war. Ho looked at her with serious eyes. Because you called for help. Back on Earth we have a saying, if you can help, you have to help. Maybe it's stupid. Maybe it's illogical, but it's what makes us human. Looked at her officers. They all seemed uncertain. This plan went against everything they knew about warfare. It relied on deception and randomness instead of strength and strategy. It asked these humans to sacrifice themselves for a people they barely knew. But every logical plan had already failed. Every strategic approach had led to defeat. Maybe what they needed wasn't more logic. Maybe they needed whatever strange madness drove these humans to answer distress calls from across the stars. "When do we begin?" asked. Ho's smile returned. "Our ships are already in position. We just needed your permission to start the craziest plan in military history." He tapped his communication device. "All ships, this is Ho. The Queen says go. Let's show the swarm what humanity looks like." As the humans returned to their shuttle, walked beside Ho. "You know this is actually completely insane, right? We're going to fly our barely functional ships into the middle of the most dangerous fleet in the galaxy and hope they fall for our trick." Ho shrugged. "You got a better idea. Run away and let them handle their own problems." "Yeah, but then we'd have to live knowing we didn't help when we could have. I don't want to be that person." "You're an idiot," said. "Probably," Ho agreed. "But I'm an idiot with a plan. That's better than being smart and hopeless." From the mothership's command center, watched the 7 tiny human ships move toward the swarm fleet. They looked like insects flying toward a storm. Admiral stood beside her. "They're going to die," he said quietly. "Yes," agreed. "But they're going to die trying to save people they've never met. What does that say about us, who were ready to die for nothing but pride?" On the screens, the human ships entered the swarm formation. The battle for survival was about to begin. The first human ship to enter the swarm formation was cargo hauler, the Morning Star. It was the smallest of the 7 ships, barely armed, built to carry grain and supplies between colonies. Now it dove straight into a cluster of swarm drones like a bird diving into a school of sharks. On the mothership, every officer watched in horror. The swarm drones were small but deadly, designed to swarm around larger ships and tear them apart with focused energy beams. There were hundreds of them, moving in perfect synchronized patterns. "She's dead," said flatly. "There's no way to survive that many drones." But ship didn't die. It twisted sideways at the last second, slipping through a gap in the drone formation that shouldn't have existed. It rolled, dove, climbed, moving in patterns that seemed random but somehow kept it alive. Energy beams cut through the space where the ship had been a second before, missing by inches. "What is she doing?" an officer asked. "Those maneuvers are impossible. No pilot can calculate movements that complex." Studied his sensors carefully. "She's not calculating. She's reacting. Look at the pattern. There is no pattern. She's just responding to what she sees in the moment." "That's insane," said. "Without calculated movements, she should have been hit a dozen times already." But the swarm drones were recalculating. Their collective intelligence was trying to predict where the human ship would go next, but every prediction was wrong because wasn't following any plan. She was improvising, something the swarm had never encountered before. The swarm adjusted its assessment. This small ship was displaying advanced evasion capabilities. Threat level, uncertain. They pulled more drones from the planetary assault to study this new enemy. Its military frigate, the Last Stand, fired its main weapon at a swarm destroyer. The shot hit, but it didn't try to pierce the armor or destroy the ship. Instead, it hit a specific point on the destroyer's hull, damaging the power distribution system. The destroyer's shields flickered and dropped to 70% efficiency. The swarm analyzed the attack. This wasn't random. The humans had identified a specific weakness and exploited it. That required detailed sensor data and precise targeting. Conclusion: human weapons were more sophisticated than their appearance suggested. The swarm diverted more forces to defend against potential precision strikes. Its mining ship, the Stone Breaker, released clouds of reflective material into space. It was just industrial waste, material used in mining operations to protect against solar radiation. But when it spread out around the ship, it created a massive cloud that confused the swarm's sensors. At the same time, the ship was broadcasting energy signatures that had from the mothership. To the swarm's sensors, It looked like there was a mothership-sized power source inside a ship that was 1/100th the size. The swarm's analysis system struggled with this information. Either the humans had impossible miniaturization technology, or their sensors were being fooled. They couldn't determine which. Uncertainty required additional resources to investigate. More ships pulled away from the attack on the Ho's Lucky Dragon was the largest human ship, but it was still tiny compared to swarm capital ships. It flew straight toward a swarm cruiser, weapons charging. Every sensor on the mothership expected the human ship to be obliterated. At the last second, Ho's ship released a spread of missiles. They weren't military missiles. They were cargo containers that had been modified to broadcast fake weapon signatures. The swarm destroyer targeted them, wasting powerful weapons on empty boxes. While the swarm was distracted, the Lucky Dragon slipped underneath the destroyer and fired its real weapons. They were old, basic laser cannons that barely scratched the destroyer's armor. But Ho had aimed for the communication arrays, the sensors, the external systems that the swarm needed to coordinate with its fleet. The destroyer was blinded. The swarm interpreted this as a deliberate strategy. The humans were isolating targets before destroying them. This suggested they were conserving their real firepower for a larger attack. Threat assessment increased. More ships diverted to defensive positions. Inside the Lucky Dragon's cockpit, Ho was sweating. How long can we keep this up? Over the communication channel's voice crackled. My ship's shields are at 40%. I've got fires in 3 compartments. Maybe another hour if we're lucky. Status. I'm having the time of my life, shouted, her ship spinning through another impossible maneuver. Also, I think my engines are melting. His voice was calmer. 2 of our escort ships just went down. We lost 30 people. But the swarm is pulling forces away from the planet. It's working. Keep it up, Ho ordered. Make them think we're more dangerous than we are. Every ship they send after us is one less ship attacking The battle became a deadly dance. The human ships moved through the swarm formation like they were playing a game, dodging and weaving and attacking in patterns that seemed to make no sense. Every time the swarm adapted to their tactics, the humans changed tactics completely. One of the salvage tugs deliberately flew into an asteroid field near the planet. The swarm sent ships to pursue it, expecting to trap it against the rocks. Instead, the human pilot used the tug's magnetic grapples to grab asteroids and throw them at pursuing swarm ships. It was crude, it was desperate, but it worked. The swarm had to recalculate again. They're treating this like a game, said, watching in disbelief. They should be terrified, they should be running. Instead, they're playing. Maybe that's their strength, suggested. We fight with honor and pride. The swarm fights with logic and efficiency. But humans, they fight with whatever works even if it looks stupid. Watched Ho's ship barrel roll past a plasma blast that should have destroyed it. They're buying us time. Our shields are back to 30%. Repair crews have restored power to half our weapons. For the first time in months, we're not losing ground. At what cost? Asked. Look at their ships, they're falling apart. He was right. The human vessels were barely holding together. The Morning Star was trailing atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. The Stone Breaker's mining drill had been torn off. One of the military frigates was flying on emergency power only. But they kept fighting. A swarm battleship, massive and powerful, moved toward the Lucky Dragon. Its weapons could destroy the human freighter with a single shot. On the mothership, everyone held their breath. Ho's ship flew straight at the battleship. At the last possible second, it released its entire cargo hold. Hundreds of shipping containers tumbled into space, each one painted to look like weapon systems. The swarm battleship's weapons locked on, trying to identify the threat. While it was distracted, its frigate hit the battleship from behind with everything it had. The attack didn't do much damage, but it damaged the battleship's maneuvering thrusters. The massive ship began to drift, temporarily out of control. "The humans just disabled a battleship with a freighter and some cargo containers," said in amazement. "How is that possible?" "Because they don't know it's impossible," said quietly. 18 hours after the battle began, the swarm's assault on the HAD stalled completely. Nearly 40% of the swarm fleet was now focused on the 7 human ships, trying to understand and counter their unpredictable tactics. But the cost was becoming clear. 2 human ships were completely destroyed, 47 people were dead. The remaining 5 ships were all heavily damaged. They couldn't keep this up much longer. Captain Ho broadcast to the Lucky Dragon, "Your mission is complete. You've given us the time we needed. Retreat now while you still can." Ho's face appeared on the screen, covered in soot and blood from a cut on his forehead. "Retreat? But we're just getting started. Besides, we still have a few tricks left." "You've done enough. You've sacrificed enough." "With respect, Your Majesty, we'll decide when we've done enough." Ho smiled, tired but determined. "That's the thing about humans. We're terrible at knowing when to quit." The communication ended. The 5 remaining human ships regrouped and prepared for another run at the swarm fleet. They were damaged. They were outnumbered. They had no chance of survival. But they flew anyway, dancing with monsters among the stars, buying time for strangers with their courage and their blood. The human ships had bought the precious time, but everyone knew it wouldn't last. The swarm was learning. Their collective intelligence was analyzing every human tactic, every unpredictable maneuver, every trick. Within another day, maybe 2, the swarm would adapt completely. When that happened, the human deception would fail, and the assault on them would resume with even greater force. Called Ho to the mothership again. This time it wasn't a strategy meeting. She asked to speak with him alone in her private quarters. When he arrived, she was surprised to see how tired he looked. He moved like every bone in his body hurt. "You should be resting," she said. "I'll rest when this is over," Ho replied, sitting down heavily. "What did you want to talk about?" Poured him a drink from a bottle of spirits. It was traditional to offer honored guests the finest refreshments. Ho took a sip and immediately started coughing. "That's strong," he gasped. "It's meant to be shared after victories," said, "but I have no victories to celebrate, only questions." She sat across from him. "Why did you really come? You could have ignored our distress call. You could have sent a polite message saying you couldn't help. Why did you risk your life and the lives of your crew for people you've never met?" Ho was quiet for a moment, looking at his drink. "Can I tell you a story about Earth?" "Please." "About 200 years ago, before we had space travel, my country went through a terrible war. Many countries invaded us. Millions died. Our cities were destroyed. For a while it looked like our entire culture might be erased from history." He took another small sip of the drink, careful this time. "But other countries helped us. They sent soldiers, supplies, medical aid. Many of those countries didn't really know us. We were just people on the other side of the world asking for help." "And they came," said. "They came, and after the war ended we rebuilt, we survived, and we promised ourselves that if we ever heard someone calling for help the way we did, we would answer, even if it didn't make sense, even if the odds were bad." Ho looked at her directly. "You called for help. Someone had to answer." Felt something break inside her chest. For 6 months she had carried the weight of her dying empire alone, making hard decisions, watching her people suffer. No one had offered help. No one had cared. And then these strange humans with their fragile ships had crossed the stars because someone had to answer. "Your sacrifice will mean nothing," she said quietly. "Even with the time you've bought us, we cannot win. The swarm is too strong. They will adapt to your tactics and then they will come for us again. All you've done is delay our extinction by a few days." "Is that what you really believe?" Ho asked. "It's what all the data says, every projection, every analysis." "Can I ask you something now? What happens to your people when the shields fail?" "They die," said simply. "All 300 billion, The swarm will consume the planet. What about evacuation? Can't you save some of them? Stood up, turning away. The do not evacuate. We do not retreat. Our culture has stood for 10,000 years on the principle that warriors face death with honor. A queen who abandons her people is no queen at all. Even if staying means everyone dies. Yes. That's the thing I've ever heard, Ho said bluntly. Spun around, anger flashing in her eyes. You know nothing of our culture, our traditions. I know that dead people don't have culture, Ho interrupted. I know that you can't rebuild if everyone is ash. I know that honor doesn't mean anything if there's no one left to remember it. Before could respond, the door opened and entered within. They looked as tired as Ho. Sorry to interrupt, said, but we have a new plan and the captain asked us to present it. What kind of plan? Asked, still angry. Pulled up holographic displays. An evacuation plan. Our calculations show that if we use every available ship, both human and, we can evacuate approximately 2 million people from your planet. That's not everyone, but it's enough to preserve your species. We'll use the swarm's confusion as cover, added. While they're still trying to figure out our tactics, we create a corridor for the evacuation ships. It'll be dangerous, but it's possible. No, said immediately. Absolutely not. I will not abandon my people. You're not abandoning them, Ho argued. You're saving the ones you can save. The ones who die won't blame you for giving others a chance to live. You don't understand. They have never retreated. Never. If I order an evacuation, I destroy everything my culture stands for. Your culture is already destroyed, said, her voice hard. The swarm destroyed it. Now you have a choice. Let your pride kill everyone or swallow that pride and save who you can save. Wanted to argue, to defend her traditions, to explain why this was impossible. But she looked at these 4 humans who had flown across the stars to help strangers, who had lost friends in battle, who were still here trying to save people they didn't even know. My people will not go willingly, she said quietly. Many will refuse to board the evacuation ships. They will choose to die here rather than live with the shame of retreat. Then you convince them, said. You're their queen. They follow you. If you tell them that survival is the new honor, they'll believe you. And what about those who can't be evacuated? The billions who will be left behind? How do I choose who lives and who dies? Looked up from her data pad. The teenage navigator's voice was surprisingly gentle. My grandmother always told me something. She said, live to see tomorrow so you can fight the day after. You can't help anyone if you're dead. You can't rebuild if everyone is gone. Save who you can save, mourn who you must mourn, but live. Thought about her mother, who had been queen before her. She thought about the 10,000 years of history, all the warriors who had stood and died with honor. She thought about what they would say if they saw her running. Then she thought about 2 million people who could live if she was brave enough to be called a coward. How long do we have to prepare? She asked. 18 hours, Ho said. After that, the swarm will finish adapting and our ships won't last much longer. Then we begin immediately, called her officers, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. All ships are to prepare for immediate evacuation operations. Priority goes to children, scientists, and cultural historians. Anyone who can preserve our knowledge and rebuild our civilization. Admiral, you will oversee the selection process. Entered the room having heard the last part. My queen, you cannot be serious. We do not run. We are who wish to remain, said firmly. That requires some of us to survive. This is not a retreat. This is a tactical withdrawal to preserve our species. Anyone who refuses these orders will be relieved of duty. Looked like he wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in his eyes. He bowed. As you command, my queen. As the officers left to begin preparations, Ho stood to leave as well. Stopped him. Thank you, she said. Not just for fighting, for teaching us that there are things more important than pride. "Don't thank me yet," Ho said. "We still have to survive the next 18 hours, and trust me, that's going to be the hard part." He was right. The evacuation would require every ship to work together, human, and to create a corridor through the swarm fleet. They would have one chance. If they failed, everyone would die. But for the first time in months, felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. The humans had given her people something she thought was lost forever. They had given them a future. The evacuation was chaos. Citizens who had never known defeat struggled to understand why they were being forced onto transport ships. Ancient warriors wept openly as they watched there from the viewports, knowing they would never see it again. Families were separated as the selection process tried to maximize the survival of knowledge and skills. Children cried for parents who couldn't come with them. Parents screamed for children being taken away. Stood on the command deck of the mothership, watching it all on the displays. Every face filled with confusion and grief was another cut to her heart. This was her people. This was her failure. 200,000 loaded, reported. "We're behind schedule. Many are refusing to board. Some have locked themselves in their homes. Others are fighting the evacuation teams." "Keep going," ordered. "Save everyone who will let us save them." Admiral approached her, his face troubled. "My queen, I must speak plainly. Many of our warriors are calling this cowardice. They say a true queen would stand with her people, not run." "They're right," said quietly. "A true queen of the old would stand and die with honor, but I am trying to be a queen of the new, the ones who survive." Below them, the human ships were preparing for their final mission. They would form a defensive screen around the evacuation convoy, drawing the swarm's attention while the transport ships escaped. It was suicide. Everyone knew it, but the humans had volunteered anyway. Ho's voice came over the communication channel. "All human ships, this is your captain speaking. You all know what we're doing. This is the big one. We make a hole in their lines and keep it open long enough for 2 million people to get through." He paused. "I won't lie to you. Most of us probably won't make it out, but those people down there will remember us. They'll tell their children about the humans who came from across the stars to help strangers. That's not a bad legacy." Over the channel's voice responded. "Captain, you're being way too dramatic. We might totally survive this." "Your optimism is noted, but please update your will anyway." "Already done. I'm leaving all my stuff to you since you'll probably die before you can use it." Despite everything, found herself almost smiling. Even facing death, the humans made jokes. The swarm had noticed the unusual activity around the planet. Their collective intelligence was analyzing the movement of ships, the gathering of resources. They calculated this was a retreat. Their response was predictable: intensify the assault, finish the enemy before they could escape. A wave of swarm ships moved toward the planet. Thousands of vessels, all perfectly coordinated, all moving to crush the once and for all. "Human ships now," Ho shouted. The 5 remaining human vessels shot forward. They were already damaged from days of fighting. Some were held together with emergency repairs and desperate hope. But they flew anyway, diving into the swarm formation like stones thrown at a mountain. Morning Star spun through the swarm lines, its movements even more erratic than before. The ship was barely responding to controls, but she made that work for her, using the random failures to create unpredictable movements. Swarm ships tried to target her but kept missing as her ship jerked and twisted in ways no functioning vessel should. Last Stand fired everything it had. The military frigate was designed for prolonged combat, but he pushed it past all safety limits. Weapons overheated and fired anyway. Shields failed and he kept advancing. His ship carved through the swarm formation, creating a path for the evacuation ships behind him. Stonebreaker used its mining equipment as weapons. The massive drill, barely attached to the ship, was aimed at a swarm cruiser. She rammed the enemy ship, the drill tearing through armor that was designed to withstand energy weapons. The cruiser broke apart, creating debris that blocked other swarm vessels. The two remaining military frigates flew in formation with the Lucky Dragon, their combined firepower focusing on any swarm ship that threatened the evacuation corridor. They couldn't destroy the enemy vessels, but they could damage them, slow them down, make them think twice before advancing. On the mothership, watched the human ships sacrifice themselves piece by piece. How many have we evacuated? 1,200,000, reported. But the swarm is breaking through. The humans can't hold them much longer. As if responding to his words, one of the human frigates exploded. A swarm destroyer had hit its reactor core. The ship became a brief star in the darkness, then nothing. All ships keep moving. Ho's voice was strained. We just need a few more minutes. But the swarm was adapting. They had finally figured out the human tactics. They stopped trying to predict the unpredictable movements and instead started firing in patterns that covered all possible escape routes. The Morning Star, which had survived so long on luck and skill, took a direct hit. The cargo hauler broke apart, atmosphere venting into space. Ho shouted over the channel. For a long moment there was silence. Then's voice came back, weak but alive. I'm okay. Emergency pod deployed, but my ship is gone. Somebody pick her up, Ho ordered. I'm on it, responded. The Stonebreaker altered course, moving to recover's escape pod even as swarm weapons hammered its shields. Its last stand was surrounded now. 5 swarm ships had boxed it in, weapons charging for a final strike. Captain, I can't get out of this one. I'm going to make it count. No, Ho started. It's been an honor, sir. The ship turned directly toward the largest concentration of swarm vessels. He pushed his reactor to critical levels, turning his frigate into a bomb. The explosion took out 3 swarm ships and damaged 5 more. Felt tears on her face. These humans, these strange beings who made jokes and refused to give up, were dying for her people. Warriors she had never met were sacrificing everything so strangers could live. Evacuation at 1,800,000, reported. We're almost there. The Lucky Dragon was the only armed human ship left now. Ho flew like a madman, his damaged freighter somehow still functioning despite fires spreading through multiple decks. He fired every weapon he had, released every last piece of cargo as debris to block swarm ships, used every trick he could think of. The Stonebreaker, having recovered, had lost most of its shields, was trying to reach the evacuation corridor, but swarm ships were closing in from all sides. 2 million evacuated, announced. The last transport is away. Ho, get out of there now, ordered. The evacuation is complete. Working on it, shouted. Her ship shuddered as another hit struck home. But these guys really don't want us to leave. Ho's Lucky Dragon positioned itself between the Stonebreaker and the pursuing swarm vessels. Go, I'll cover you. That's suicide. Yeah, well, wouldn't be the first stupid thing I've done today. Go. Watched helplessly as Ho's ship, barely holding together, faced down a dozen swarm vessels alone. It fired its last missiles, its last energy blasts, everything it had. The ship was coming apart, pieces of hull tearing away, fires visible through breaches in the armor. Captain Ho broadcast, her voice breaking. You've done enough, please try to survive. Ho's face appeared on the screen one last time. He was covered in blood and soot, the ship burning around him, but he smiled. Tell your people to build something better, okay? Don't waste this. The Lucky Dragon's reactor exploded. The blast created a barrier of energy and debris that blocked the swarm's pursuit long enough for the Stonebreaker to reach the evacuation fleet. The evacuation ships jumped to faster-than-light speed, escaping into the stars. Behind them, the swarm fleet fell upon them. Within hours, the planet was consumed. 300 billion lives, 10,000 years of civilization gone. But 2 million survived. Months passed. The refugees, guided by human support ships, found a hidden world far from the swarm's path. It was smaller than theirs, less beautiful, but it was theirs. They began to build. Stood before her people in the first permanent structure they had erected. It was a memorial hall, and on its walls were carved the names of all who had died. At the very top, in the place of highest honor, were the names of the 143 humans who had answered a distress call from strangers. Captain Ho, engineer, lieutenant, navigator, and all the others. "We are no longer the who conquered the stars," said to the assembled crowd. "We are the who learned to survive, the who learned that strength isn't refusing to fall but learning to rise again, the who learned that asking for help isn't weakness but wisdom." She looked at the names on the wall. "These humans taught us that the greatest warriors are not those who never fall, but those who extend a hand to lift others up. We will honor them by becoming that hand for others. We will answer the calls for help that come to us, no matter how impossible the odds, because that's what they did for us." 6 months later, the first joint human fleet launched. It was small, just a dozen ships, but it carried a new mission: to find other species threatened by the swarm and offer them what Ho had offered: a choice, a chance, hope. The war against the swarm continued. The battles were still desperate, the odds were still terrible, but something had changed. Word spread through the galaxy about the humans, the small species that didn't know when to quit, the species that answered distress calls, the species that helped. Other civilizations began to join the fight, not because they thought they could win, but because the humans had proved that trying was worth it even when winning seemed impossible. Stood on the bridge of her new flagship, looking at the stars. Beside her was, who had survived and chosen to stay with thee as a military advisor, and who had decided she liked aliens more than she liked hauling cargo. "Do you think Ho knew," asked, "that his sacrifice would start all this?" "Probably not," said. "He was just a cargo captain who couldn't ignore a distress call. But that's the thing about humans. We don't help because we expect to change the universe. We help because it's the right thing to do." Ahead of them, their sensors detected another distress signal, another species under attack, another impossible situation. "Set course," ordered. "Someone needs help." "You know this might be suicide, right?" asked. Smiled. It was a very human smile. "Yeah, well, wouldn't be the first stupid thing we've done." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, racing toward strangers who needed help. Behind them, carved in stone in a memorial hall on a distant world, the names of the 143 remained. A reminder that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from those who never fall, but from those who fall reaching out to help others rise.